All right, everybody, we're here live, Sarah with Catalyst Wellness Coaching. You might see me go in and out of frame because I'm just videotaping this today, but we are here today talking about histamine intolerance, and we're going to talk about things like sinus infections, allergies, gut reactions to histamine. I thought May was a good time to do this because that's usually when all the pollen and all the things are growing, and that's a lot of times when people, sometimes even, actually this year, I heard a lot of people say April is when it kicked up kind of for them because we had that 1 week in April where it was like 80 degrees or whatever. So that's what we'll focus on today. We'll entertain some questions, but I'll probably hit the video off before we hit questions just in case there's any personal questions. So histamines are chemicals in your body that are produced in response to some sort of allergen. And so your body produces white blood cells called mast cells. So if you've ever heard of something called mast cell activation syndrome, that is like histamine intolerance times 10. Like your whole body sometimes is a mess. And many people with SIBO, we were talking before, have that also. I got tested for that last year because I thought maybe that's what was going on, but it wasn't, thank God. And so the white blood cells are called mast cells, and they release histamines during the inflammatory or immune response to allergens. And so this is all part of like a natural, healthy, balanced immune system, and many foods naturally contain histamine, or they trigger a release of histamine in the body, and it's not a big deal. If you are immune compromised, if you have gut or bacterial overgrowth, hormonal changes, lots of things, and that's the thing, like you may never have had histamine issues before, and you may have what you're thinking is like this adult onset allergies or like histamine response that you never had that. I remember when my husband had to remind me that when my dad turned about 50, he had never had anything, and all of a sudden he was like allergic to all this stuff, and we lived in the woods and it was horrible, and he never had that before, and so he started taking antihistamine at the age of 50, but he never had it before. So it's interesting how that happens. So problems occur when there's a dysfunction or a deficiency in the enzymes that you have in your body that break down histamine. Often, you'll hear me talk about this lots of times. Over the age of 40, our stomach acid goes down, and we lack the enzymes to digest food as well as we used to. So that's why you may find over the age of 40 or 50 or whatever, you're like, gosh, I used to be able to eat this and I felt fine, and now I don't anymore. So naturally, our stomach enzyme production goes down, and the enzyme called DAO, I'm not going to spell out the whole thing because it's a lot, that enzyme naturally goes down too. So that's sometimes why people develop histamine and digestion issues later in life that they didn't have before. And so without the correct enzymes to effectively get rid of excess histamine when you eat high histamine foods or when you're exposed to histamines, then that's when you get this reaction basically. So then you can experience what we call like histamine overflow. So it's like there's all this histamine in your body and you can't clear it. Sometimes that happens with hormone stuff actually too. If you have all this estrogen in your body, it's usually estrogen and not the others, but if you have estrogen in your body, it might not be that you have too much, but more that you're taking in, you have a normal amount of estrogen in your body, but it's just sitting there and it needs to be kind of like flushed out. So that's when we use supplements like DIM and things like that. So there may be an imbalance between excessive histamine ingestion with food or deficient breakdown of it in the body. And so symptoms, they're a wide range though. So headaches is a big one. GI symptoms, skin for sure, swelling, flushing, rashes. Those are probably the more traditional ones that you're familiar with. Eczema. One of the things that I experienced when I was telling you the story before we taped that I was like, what is going on? I was like, I never had a panic attack before, but that's what it felt like. Heart palpitations. So that can happen when you have just like this big overload. And so one of the things I had eaten when I was telling you about my experience it was last New Year's Eve. And see, I just put it all together really about 6 months ago, the histamine, the estrogen part, is we went to Maryland Houston's for New Year's Eve, like we always do. And I was mad too because I didn't get cheesecake, I didn't drink alcohol, I got a salad and a 6-ounce beef fillet. And I thought, okay, this will be good. I kind of was heading into it, not feeling great. I'm like, I don't want to get sick tonight. Like it's New Year's Eve, I'm out. And I got really sick within 10 or 15 minutes, and it was the beef. I thought, wait, beef is one of my like safe, easy foods. because the beef there and at a really good steakhouses is dry aged, like it's hung for a long time. And so now all of a sudden I turned my sort of safe food into something that was really inflammatory for me, high histamine. And I only got 6 ounces, and I knew halfway into it actually stopped because I was like, oh, what's going on, you know? Hives, itching, your eyes, yeah, itchy, watery eyes, sometimes swollen eyes. If you are female and having like dry eyes too, remember that can be hormonal also. So that can be a lot of times postmenopausal, or I'm going to call it, we call it secondary postmenopausal. So a lot of women have been through menopause in their early 50s, and then there's another cycle that happens sometimes in your mid 60s, and you can get kind of dry eyes. So that was actually what mine was too, was just, you don't produce those like, and it can happen with men with the drop of testosterone too. So if you're having eye issues, it could be histamine, but just keep in mind it could be hormonal too as we age. And so I ended up having to get a prescription eye drop for mine because I did the artificial tears like 20 times a day or whatever, and I had to do that so my insurance would cover whatever the drop was. I did all the like natural things. I was like this short of like throwing like olive oil in my ear, you know, or in my eyes. Yeah, Restasis is what I use, so that's like a prescription eye drop now. So keep that in mind too, that lots of these symptoms I'm talking about with histamine intolerance can be hormonal or could be other things too. So that's what makes this stuff so hard, right? There's like this crossover and this like, you have to like pick all this stuff apart. But that's the idea of functional medicine and functional nutrition, is not just treating each individual symptom, but looking at the whole system and what everybody, what someone comes in with. So actual major histamine intolerance is measured about like, the estimate is about 4% of the population. I think it's probably higher because people have it and they don't know that that's what it is, just like lots of other things we don't know. So, anxiety can come with that, heart palpitations, like I said, brain fog, digestive problems, fatigue, which is connected with the brain fog, hormonal imbalances, again, feed and react to histamine. So just remembering that, low blood pressure. So that can happen for sure too. I already have that, and so I think that's why it was exacerbated for me. I'm going to say regular headaches, but also maybe more migraines. So maybe you've had headaches before, but all of a sudden you're having migraines where you're like, if you've never had them before, you're like super sensitive to light and sound and usually nauseous. Like a lot of times you'll throw up if you have a migraine. And then, like I said, heart palpitations, kind of that racing heart kind of feeling. So let's talk about what a low histamine diet would be then if you want to just try it and see what happens. And maybe what you do, if you think you're having histamine things, is you try a low histamine diet, and you really only need to do it for 30 days. Maybe you do that in combination with maybe an antihistamine, or maybe like D-Hist or product that I was talking about, or I'm going to talk about, well, I might as well tell you now. There's an enzyme that you can take, so I take it every day, that helps you digest higher histamine foods. So I take a natural, sort of a broad spectrum enzyme anyways to digest all my food before I eat. I take these little like piles of pills I take to help digest my food. It helps a ton. The brand that I use is Enzymatica Digest Gold. And so it might be here, otherwise I can get it for you. That's a broad spectrum. That one does not have DAO in it, which is the enzyme that you need to digest high histamine food, which explains why I would take that and have a high histamine food and still have a reaction, and I couldn't figure out why. DAO is literally what you would look for, the DAO enzyme. It's about 4 milligrams with each meal. So I take 12 milligrams a day. I take one with each meal, basically. And so it has to be about, just like a normal enzyme, about 10 to 15 minutes before you eat. And then you're good. If you forget and you're like taking your first bite, just like pop it in. It'll still help. Just, it's nice to get it in your stomach before the food hits, just like anything else. So a low histamine diet requires the restriction or elimination of any food, ingredient, or substance that contains histamine, just like when we do other kind of types of elimination diets. I'm going to try today too not to really bring in any other elimination diets other than just talk about this, because then that just gets kind of big. But so it basically, what you're noticing potentially is like this allergic response. So during the consumption of histamine, If you're reducing and having a low histamine diet, it can really significantly reduce your symptoms, and you should know within 30 days. So this isn't something you need to do really long term. But we're going to talk about beverages too, because there's beverages that are an issue too, kind of like what you're talking about with the green tea too, not just the food. So after you've ruled out actual food allergies, ideally is a good time to try the low histamine diet then, because maybe you are having some allergic response to a food. Now that's different than a food sensitivity, remember that. So if you are sensitive to, let's say, dairy, for example, your gut's just not going to feel good, you might have a headache, you might have all these symptoms, but it's not going to come at you generally, it's not going to come at you 5 minutes after you have something. It's going to take a little while because it has to hit your digestive system. Or you'll eat dairy once and you'll feel fine, and then after the third, fourth, fifth time you have dairy in a row, all of a sudden by the end of the week you're like, I don't feel good, I don't know where this is coming from, but it can be the buildup in your system. That's a sensitivity. An allergy, you're going to have a food and you'll know right away. It doesn't have to be full anaphylaxis. My son has a peanut allergy. We were in the ER last year because he accidentally ate one bite of a granola bar with a peanut. We didn't know, it wasn't labeled. But it doesn't have to be full-on anaphylaxis, but it'll be much more immediate, within 15 minutes or less, just like my steak example that I gave you when I ate that. It was pretty soon. I could feel something was happening. But that can be an actual food allergy, and a food allergy can feel like a histamine response. So see if you can rule that out first. If not, there's really no harm in doing a low histamine diet for a month. You're not gonna hurt anything, so you could try it and see what happens, and then you'll know. I like the idea of doing a low histamine diet and adding in this DAO supplement and maybe a D-hist. That's what I would do. If you're going to go all in for 30 days, that's probably what I would do. Take the 4.4, it's 4.2, but 4 milligrams of DAO before each meal. Take D-hist for maybe some of your other symptoms. Do a low histamine diet for 30 days, and then report back to yourself, how it feels. So there's also histamine releasing foods. So I'll go into that a little bit too. So here's a food list. So if you are histamine intolerant, or if you're trying to avoid high histamine foods, there's others, but I really, without getting too restrictive, want to cover the really big ones. Alcohol is probably number one. And so my New Year's Eve example, I didn't drink and order a drink, but I took a drink of my friend's drink next to me. He got an old fashioned, and I love an old fashioned, but I'm not going to waste $12 on an old fashioned that I know I wasn't going to drink. But I took 2 drinks of his before I got my steak, and I always wonder if that's maybe what set me off too. And it was within, again, 60 seconds. I was like, oh, this is why I don't drink. I don't feel good anymore, especially red wine. I was noticing this last year or two. I don't drink a lot, but when I do, it's like a Cabernet, like a red wine. And I was noticing for sure with the red wine, I was having these weird symptoms. I was dizzy and flush and whatever. So alcohol. Bone broth, unfortunately, bone broth is so good for you, but it's definitely high histamine. So that was the other thing that happened with me personally, is I drink bone broth protein shakes every day. And that was one of the things I noticed. It seemed like all of a sudden I was getting bloated and didn't feel good after these shakes that I've been drinking for a decade, And so I thought, well, I'm just gonna keep drinking them because they're good for me. But then I'm like, geez, could this be it? And why would this be happening all of a sudden? Collagen's another one, collagen and bone broth. So I cut those out for 10 days and I felt 70% better. I just stopped drinking them, and now actually I drink a pea protein shake instead, which is not my favorite. It doesn't taste as good as the other one. Yeah, you don't drink peas then. So there's other options, but I really liked the taste. I use Ancient Nutrition or Pure Paleo. They're the best. So also don't take this as I shouldn't drink bone broth shakes, because 90% of the people, I think it's probably the best choice for you for other health things. But if you have high histamine, you'll notice for sure. So alcohol, bone broth, anything canned. Less so if you have canned it yourself, because then it's less likely to have been sitting as long and you've canned it fresher as opposed to in a factory. But yeah, canned food, canned vegetables, canned tuna. That was the other thing I was noticing I was having a reaction with. Every Saturday I come here and I get the basics tuna salad, and I eat it with gluten-free crackers and some carrots on the side. That's my Saturday lunch after I'm done grocery shopping. And I've been eating the same lunch all week and I'm ready for something different. And so I was noticing an issue with that. So there it is. I am back to eating tuna, by the way. In fact, I'm going to buy some today now that I take the enzyme and I've calmed my body down. So it made me happy. So cheese, sorry, because that's fermented and aged. That's the idea of what cheese is. So cheese and wine. Don't go to a wine and cheese party if you have histamine issues.
The tuna in the packets, is that as bad?
Same thing. It's basically like it's like not fresh. So if you want to think of like what are good low histamine foods, it's fresh foods basically. Not that tuna is unhealthy for you at all, but from a histamine perspective, it could maybe set you off. So any canned, a lot of times fish you can't get fresh around here, so it's canned, right? Or preserved in some sort of way. So anything preserved, canned, fermented, like I call it old food, and like anything that's been preserved in such a way so it can sit on a shelf and be shelf stable. So you gotta all move to Norway and catch fresh fish. But fermented foods. So I see a lot of this for people who are, I would say, fairly healthy. They're doing stuff like kefir and kimchi and sauerkraut and yogurts and kombucha. Those are all fermented. And so I knew for a while that like some of those were bothering me. But like sauerkraut was, again, another food that, again, it's like me putting all this stuff to my head. And what I do is when I have a reaction to a food or something happens to me, I actually write it down. I have a place on my phone where I keep track of all this stuff. And then 3 months later, I look back on it and I'm like, oh, and then I know what it is. I mean, for me, I know what it is because I do it for a living. But like I was able to connect the dots and be like, this is all high histamine foods. I do that when someone comes in to work with me. One of the questions I ask everyone is there any foods that you notice that when you eat, you don't feel good? Either right away or a couple hours later or whatever. People start rattling through the list. I just had a woman last week. And so she started talking about some berries and honey and a list of some things. And in my mind, I was like, I think you have a fructose intolerance. Let's try a no fructose diet. And she felt better. In like 2 weeks, she felt better. So it's just like we group foods into like fruits and vegetables and meats and whatever, but there's certain types of foods that are high fructose or high fructan or high sorbitol or high histamine or whatever. And so sometimes keeping some sort of a food journal, as it crazy it might sound or as it crazy as it feels like you are, can help you. I realized an issue I had with almonds probably 10 years ago because I kept a food journal. I went out to like a salad place and got like slivered almonds, and then I didn't feel good after that. It was like an hour or two after that, so I quick wrote it down. I had a granola bar at home, didn't feel good, wrote it down. And then again, about 3 months later, I looked back and all I noticed what was in common of that list I had made was almonds. So then what I did that night, which I hated to do, but is I sat down and had like 15 almonds basically to test it, and I felt horrible, and I was like, all right, well, and I was happy, believe it or not, because I was like, this is good news, then you know what it is, right? Legumes, beans, canned, again. Beans in general are hard from a digestion perspective for most people, so when we go low fermentation or low FODMAP, I usually don't do any beans for people, or it's very minimal. And again, this doesn't have to be forever. This is like if you're gonna try it for 30 days and see what happens, right? Canned mushrooms, fresh, not as much, but not in like high quantities. All the smoked meats, lunch meats, the nitrates in there, bacon, salami, salmon, and ham. Fresh salmon you would have to get, not fresh frozen or that's been sitting. The other thing is, not here, but if you go to Woodman's or somewhere else and you get salmon, it's injected actually with a substance that's high histamine that makes it pink and look pretty for longer. And so the substance in itself, I forget what it's called, that's high histamine too.
I just wanna, I actually went to the ER a couple winters ago.
Yeah.
I was allergic to something that they preserve crab meat in, and I'm noticing they're preserving fish in this stuff.
Yep.
And it's a chemical salt called
Yep.
sodium acid pyrophosphate.
Yep.
It messed my sodium up.
Yep, they put a lot of that in salmon in particular. Yes, crab, tuna, shrimp. Yep. At delis, they'll do that. And you think when you're looking at something that's fresh, but it is all coated with something just to make it look, and again, for lots of people, it's not an issue, but you just have to figure out what yours is too. So shellfish is an issue. Vinegars too. those are higher histamine too. So that was something I noticed that was bothering me too. I go to Bodacious and I get all the awesome vinegars, and I was like, no. Some bother me more than others, the darker ones more than the light, but and now I'm good, but I just can only do like a table. I just don't, douse like half the bottle in there. So, but like vinegars. But if you think of that, that's preserved and fermented also, So anything like old, preserved, fermented, canned is probably going to be high histamine. So your best bets are all fresh meats, poultry, fresh fish if you can get it, but like all that fresh stuff. Pretty much all fresh fruits and vegetables are fine. There's some that block histamine receptors. I'll talk about those a little bit. I don't want to get you too confused where you're avoiding everything. So I'll maybe give you the second list too, but just be aware of it. But maybe if you're going to go low histamine, you don't necessarily have to start there. Spinach is a little bit higher histamine, higher oxalate. Sometimes people have oxalate sensitivity, so spinach can be an issue there too. But then I just say use kale or arugula or spring greens, or there's so many other things out there that you can use. So, and a lot of times, again, it's in larger amounts. It might not be a couple bites, but. So then there's foods that if you eat that they aren't high histamine, but if you eat them, they release the histamine in your body and cause this reaction. And I don't mean detox it, they like release it so it builds up in your body. Avocados, so that was a big one for me. Citrus fruits, which unfortunately, most of the citrus fruits for my low fermentation diet are totally safe. So I eat tons of kiwi, lemons, limes, papaya, pineapple, oranges. And so all of those then are, can potentially release histamine in the body. Strawberries are in there. Tomatoes is a big one too, actually. If I were to pick two off that list that I see bother people the most as far as a histamine release would be avocados and tomatoes. So if you want to pick two from that list, but you don't want to get rid of your citrus fruits, then I would say those two. So then the third list is there's a couple foods or a couple beverages that block the enzyme, that's this DAO enzyme, that controls histamine in your body. Alcohol, energy drinks, which don't drink those anyways, right? And then black and green tea, so to your point. And I tell people to drink green tea for lots of good reasons, and there's so many good things about it. But again, if you're gonna just try this histamine experiment, and anytime you're doing an elimination diet, I try to tell people to focus just kind of on one thing, otherwise you drive yourself crazy. But that can block that DAO enzyme that I was talking about to take with food. And so you might have some natural DAO enzyme in your body that you have to digest foods. But if you're drinking a whole bunch of black or green tea or alcohol, it's going to block that from doing its job, basically. So that would be another thing. Surprisingly, coffee's not on the list. I don't know why, but the teas are. So, yeah, you're like, yay. And it's usually the first thing I look for in all diets. I'm like, oh. I just worked with somebody earlier this week, and I'm doing an autoimmune diet with her, and she's a lot of symptoms and she's in pretty bad shape. And so normally when I tell people like coffee is one of the things we try to look for, and not just because of the caffeine, because they should cut caffeine for people for 6 weeks, but coffee is actually in the bean family and legume family, and that's like an autoimmune issue a lot of times for people. It's usually cross-reactivity with gluten. It can be like whatever, but a lot of times people cry when I tell them. So I try to like negotiate with people, and I'm like, all right, here's the top, especially people like with Hashimoto's, like thyroid stuff. I'm like, here's the top 5 triggers. Like, I would love to dump all 5 of these for you, but if there's one in there that you're like, Sarah, I'm gonna have a mental heart attack if you take this away, then let's leave that one in there and let's just negotiate how much you're having of it. And so the top 5 usually are gluten, dairy, sugar, alcohol, and caffeine. So those are the top 5 for most people. In fact, if you come out of here today and you're like, I'm not doing this low histamine diet, and I just wanna like cut 5 things from my diet to feel better overall, those are always my top 5. So, and when I say sugar, I don't necessarily mean like fresh fruit. I mean like added sugar in any form, or sugar substitutes. That's a whole other topic. But a lot of times coffee is that one out of the 5 that people are like, oh, can I just? So then what I might do is like, okay, let's talk about going half calf, or because not just the caffeine, like I said, it's the bean itself, but a lot of people, the issue too is that they're coming in and they're drinking like 60 ounces a day too. So then I'm like, okay, you actually might not really have an issue if we could bump it down to 16. But of course they're drinking 60 because they're tired, which is related to a whole bunch of other things. So if I can figure out why they're tired and get to the root cause of that and increase their energy, then they don't really feel the need for the coffee anyway, so it's not a big deal, other than the ritual is nice and it tastes yummy. So just like any elimination diet, histamine usually has this phased approach. So first you do this avoidance 30-day thing where you avoid everything. And then slowly what I would do is kind of reintroduce one at a time some of those foods that you cut out and just see, because maybe some of the high histamine foods bother you and some of them don't, just like anything else. And then stage 3 is basically your maintenance phase. Maybe you've determined that you have to, stay low histamine, or maybe you determined that, it's just, aged beef and avocados and sauerkraut that bothers me, which is great. Then you just know that you can't really have much of those, or you can. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but you just might, not feel good. So what to do maybe clinically outside of food if you think that you have a histamine intolerance? There's a couple options. Some allergists and docs can run a histamine blood test for you. I do urine a lot of times, and so to see if you have a lot of histamine in your blood or urine. Here's a problem with that though. It really only captures the last 24 hours of like what was in your body, a histamine test. And so if you ate high histamine foods or expose yourself to high histamine things, and then you do a blood test and be like, oh, you have high histamine, but you could go in a week later and it might be low. It's just not always like super reliable, but you can test and just kind of see. One of the things you could do too is follow a low histamine diet and then get a histamine test. And if you're still high, then there's something else kind of going in your body too that's causing high histamine. So get to the root of other problems in your body that might be feeding the high histamine. SIBO or any gut dysbiosis, hormone imbalance, those are the big ones. Gluten intolerance. So a lot of times people with gluten intolerance are having high inflammatory reactions, and that feeds high histamine also. So one of the other things you can do if you're going to do a low histamine diet is you can go gluten-free along with it if you want. That's an option too. Or you can go gluten-free first, and maybe your symptoms go away and you don't have to do a low histamine diet. You can try that too. Some medications, I don't have a full list for you today, but some you can Google too, like high histamine medications. There's about half the SSRIs sometimes are like high histamine causing, so those are antidepressants. MCS, we talked about too, mast cell activation syndrome. If you have that, then you're going to have histamine issues for sure. So focus on just eating fresh foods, do some sort of elimination, and then you can bring back and figure out what your problem foods are, heal your gut. Here's a short list of maybe foods that are sort of the opposite of high histamine or histamine blocking, and they will help your body get rid of excess histamine. So like good stuff. Foods with high B6, or you can take a B6 supplement. Chicken, turkey, potatoes. Short list. I know, potatoes, you guys, if you've heard me speak before, potatoes get vilified in like lots of different communities. I put the potatoes in all my meal plans, a fair amount of them. I do homemade mashed potatoes, I do sliced potatoes. The only exception, the only time I don't put potatoes in is autoimmune. I don't, because it's a nightshade and that can be a trigger for people. However, long term I found out that a lot of times potatoes are not triggers, it's usually tomatoes and peppers. Hardly ever are potatoes a problem for people. They're easily digestible, they have vitamin C, eat potatoes. Leave here and eat potatoes. Fresh chicken and turkey. So here's the other thing that I had to watch with histamine stuff. I batch cook a crap ton of stuff on Sunday. I had to make sure to only let my stuff sit in the fridge, my leftovers, 48, maybe 72 hours, and make sure that my fridge is pretty cold. So I'm pretty like, to be honest with you, from like a food safety perspective, I'm like, whatever. I like really don't, I'm not like a germaphobe, and not really, I was just like, whatever, it'll be fine, we'll eat it. I really don't care. So now I've really had to like dial in a little bit, like how long has that food been sitting in there? And like today and tomorrow, a lot of times there are leftover lunch days in my house with kids, and so I will pull out for everybody. Like I'm like, eat all, and I always tell the kids, I'm like, eat everything that you can't go in the cabinet and get anything else. You have to eat this food first. But I will pick out of there what I'm gonna have first, and I know based on like if it was made like 5 days ago, I won't touch it because I just know it's not a good idea for me anymore. Most people, it's not an issue. What I do when I batch cook is I make a big batch of like, let's say chicken vegetable soup on a Sunday, and then I put containers Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in the fridge, but then I freeze the rest of it Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday now. I didn't always because it tasted fine. But now I freeze the second half of my week for me personally, because then I know that I have inhibited or stopped that bacterial growth, on there. Once you cook it, the stuff should last 5 to 7 days. You should be good. But from a food poisoning perspective, that was something I was just never worried about. But from a histamine part, after you cook it, it can grow histamines. About 72 hours is kind of that like iffy spot. So, okay. Increasing copper in your diet, a big food for that would be like asparagus, fresh asparagus. Increasing vitamin C, you could take a supplement, or just eating more fruits and vegetables overall. I won't even go to the full list. Supplement-wise, black cumin and quercetin are both good natural medicines with antihistamine properties. But both of those are in that D-Hist supplement that I told you about. That's why I like those all-in-ones where there's a couple things in there. So D-Hist from Orthomolecular and the DAO supplement is probably the two from a supplement perspective for histamine that I would suggest above probably anything else, actually. And so you don't have a whole drawer full of crap. Like, those are the two things. Neither of them are at basics, actually, though. So if you want... if anybody wants to leave their email at the end, I'll give you a list, but I can send it to you. Like, I can send you both of them or whatever. I can't order the D-Hist for you, but I can get it at the doctor's office. DAO I can get, and I use that all the time. Seeking Health is probably my favorite brand for DAO, because Ben Lynch, the creator of the company, focuses a lot on histamine stuff, but there's a whole bunch out there that are good. It's just 4 milligrams of DAO. So I ran out last week too, and I think I've like stabilized, so I felt better, but I did notice when I didn't have it. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna keep taking that, And I don't know about you, I don't want to take a whole bunch of stuff, but when I find something that works, I don't care. So I'm just gonna keep going with it. But I do try to trial and error throughout like different parts of my life, and I'll pull something and see, well, let's just have, just intuition, I'll pull it and just see how I feel. And if I feel just as good, then I don't take it anymore. Some of those things you rotate in, some of them, I have these supplements that I take every day, and then I have a chunk in the fridge that are just more my like as needed type of things, So I wanted to spend just a few minutes on sinus infections in particular, because that's what I see a lot of people coming in. It was like allergies, colds, and repeated sinus infections. I get a lot of cancellations for sinus infections. I notice, like, when people are just coming to see me, I have a sinus infection, I can't come in. I've heard they're horrible. I've never had one. My husband's had quite a few. He has, allergy and like lots of ear, nose, and throat kind of issues. So I'd say top list of things for preventing a sinus infection. So a lot of this is related to histamine, but some's not, but it's all connected here. And so there's this like acute sinusitis where you have basically a sinus infection or a flare, or there's just basically where you feel like just inflamed and puffy. And I can tell in my office, I can look here like underneath somebody's eyes, or if you ever go to the chiropractor or any kind of massage or body work, they'll tell you basically if your lymph nodes aren't draining, or if your ears, like that was the other thing, the other symptom I was getting with high histamine, my ears got plugged. Not painful, but like I couldn't hear. I felt like there was like water stuck in there, and there was basically like nothing was draining. You know how it all just sticks in there? So stay hydrated. We say that for everything, but it's good for everything. So just make sure half your body weight in water every day. Some people look at me funny when I say that. So just, that might seem like a lot if you're not doing that. So you do a good job of that, don't you? Mostly? Yeah.
Half your body weight in ounces.
In ounces of water, yeah.
You don't want to drink 40 pounds.
No. So if you weigh 160 pounds, then 80 ounces. But figure out what works for you. Doesn't have to be exact, but if you're drinking 16 ounces, I would suggest that's probably not good for any adult. So,
You drinking 3
is that like,
a day?
yeah, so that's what I do. I'm about the same as you. So I don't have my Yeti with me. This one's only 16, but my Yeti's like 20 or 24. So I just try to do 3 of those. And I even kind of be like, all right, you need to drink that one by noon, 4, and 8 is basically what I do. And then anything I drink after 8 is fine. But generally I try to finish my first one by noon. And I'll just kind of look at the clock like, ooh, it's noon, I have a chunk left, And I don't feel good when I chug stuff, so I have to sip it. But one of the things that I do with myself with it's not really reverse psychology. It's like behavior modification with myself. When I get up in the morning, I want like a cup of coffee and want to relax. That's part of like my ritual, right? But I don't let myself have a cup of coffee until I drink 16 ounces of water and I put lemon in it. I'm not even really thirsty in the morning or like throughout the day, but I just make myself drink, which is about one of these. So I put whatever in it and I just drink it, and it might take me an hour or two. But I do, and then I'll sit down and have whatever beverage I wanted. But that's a good way to start. I tell people to front load your day. People say, I'm in the bathroom all the day. If you slowly increase your water, and once your body gets used to it, especially if you're adding electrolytes to your water, you shouldn't be up in the middle of the night, and especially if you front load it in the first 8 hours of your day. So if you get up at 7 a.m., I would drink most of your water between 7 and 3 if you can. Yeah. One of the things I talk about with water, not to get off on tangent, but if you add electrolytes to your water shouldn't run right through you as much too. So Ultima is a good one. LMNT is probably my favorite electrolyte beverage. I drink that every morning because I have low blood pressure, so it helps with that. But you want the sodium, magnesium, potassium in with your water. We want water to do its job and absorb into our organs and hydrate our organs and do what it's supposed to do in our body. If you sometimes just plain water, for some people, they'll say, gosh, I drink 16 ounces of water and I'm running the bathroom literally 5 minutes after. That tells me it's not staying in your system, and that's not good either. It's not doing anything. It's just going right through you. So some people add like sea salt. You can Google even a recipe. I just posted on my Facebook page last week how to make homemade Gatorade.
Have you
sea salt, honey.
Water?
Yeah, that one's good too. Yeah, I think that one's good too. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
But it's like, at the salt spa,
Yeah.
she sent, like, there's a kit where you can
There
make
is.
Soleil water.
Yeah.
And I feel like I was getting,
The Breathe Salt
Flush.
Spa. Oh yeah. You might be too much for you.
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So maybe just kick down the amount of it.
Well, I was doing a teaspoon in the morning with water.
And was it, if you felt like
Yeah.
flush?
And I didn't know if it was turmeric that was making me flush, or if it was the Soleil water, or what it was.
Probably
Just
the
like,
actual, so the Soleil, the salt in it will salt makes you flush. So,
yeah.
and that's not necessarily bad, but it's probably not like what you want. Like you don't want to feel like that.
Right.
I noticed that we haven't been in a long time, but when we used to go to Fuji in town, because Owen loves it, where they set your food on fire and stuff, like boys like that. The whole rest of the night, I would have a hard time sleeping. Mike would too, and we both get flush. It's from all the sauce. It's so high salt there.
Yeah.
We are just not used to like going out to eat that much, and I am fairly liberal at home with salt because of my blood pressure issues.
Yes.
But
Me too.
you're nowhere near the salt you're getting when you go out to eat, and especially at like a Chinese place in particular, they had so much salt in their food. So usually, if you were to ask my family what's my number one complaint when we go out to eat, is I think stuff's too salty because I'm just not used to eating all that or whatever. But you can use it at home, yeah. And I try to use, one of the things that happened with me like years ago when I was still trying to figure out my blood pressure issues. My blood pressure is very, very, very low, so I'm dizzy all the time. Yours is too, isn't it? A little bit low.
Well, I'm usually like 100 over 60, 80.
Okay, so I'm like 80 over 50 when I wake up, and then 90 over 60 towards the end of the day. That's why you'll never see me working out at the gym early in the morning because I pass out, So I started drinking element tea, but then, because and my husband was always like, you eat too healthy, but he was kind of right. I was basically just not getting enough salt in my food. I was eating like, chicken, shrimp, beef, whatever. And I wasn't like afraid of salting. I just never really added salt to stuff that much. And I ate so many fruits and vegetables that in the end actually was not getting enough salt. And so we see that when people do, particularly when people do like keto diets actually, we usually give them electrolyte supplements or like salt supplements. So even when people switch to a whole food diet, if they're switching from going out to eat a lot to a whole food diet, you want to add salt, sea salt in your diet. And you can get that in bulk here and just put it in something. So stay hydrated. Have a diet full of antioxidants. Again, this is just fruits and vegetables and potatoes. So antioxidants help fight the free radicals that contribute to chronic sinusitis. And furthermore, they protect like the mucous membrane. So kiwi, berries, pumpkin, papaya, sweet potatoes, and my favorite is pineapple. Pineapple has a natural digestive enzyme for people with gut conditions, and it also contains the enzyme that breaks down the buildup of sinus inflammation. So it could be pineapple juice, could be fresh pineapple. Pineapple's a really good one. So that's number 2, antioxidants. Number 3, garlic and ginger have antimicrobial and antifungal properties. That's probably not the first time you ever heard that, but adding, unless you're doing low FODMAP and avoiding garlic for a little bit, fresh garlic and things and fresh ginger. I tend to get the garlic and ginger paste from here because otherwise my stuff goes bad, and I just honestly don't want to chop up little tiny bits of ginger and garlic and peel them. So we use the squeezed garlic and the ginger, and I put that in soups and other stuff all the time. So my daughter she loves ginger. She makes ginger, mint, lime ice cubes and puts them in our freezer. So it's just lime juice, ginger, and mint. So you see my freezer, it looks like grass in there, but like you pull it out and she's got all these concoctions, but then we put it like in our drinks or like in a sparkling water or smoothies or whatever, but it's kind of fun. So we'll do like sparkling water, fresh strawberries, and then we put those ice cubes in it. So, and it's pretty, so. Number 4, avoiding the high histamine foods, but I'm gonna give you 2 in addition, in particular, that are really tough for sinusitis. Dairy's number 1, sorry again. Dairy is the most common culprit of congestion and microbial growth in the sinuses. So histamine and fermentation aside, just even fresh dairy. So avoid dairy if you've had previous episodes of sinus infections. The number 2 would just be sugar, because sugar is pro-inflammatory and increases the production of mucus just overall. Out of the histamine foods, if I had to pick for you kind of the top ones, probably cheese and alcohol would probably be my 2 ones, and then any of those canned fermented kind of products. Gluten, as an aside, in itself is not always high histamine, but it contributes to a lot of the things we're talking about, so a lot of times I just kind of pull that too. Chocolate's in there too, but I mean, if you're eating a square of chocolate a day, it's probably not a big deal, but if you're eating a ton of it, sometimes that can be an issue for people. And then, like I said, as an aside, as far as the release of histamine, tomatoes is a big one that I see a lot of times as an issue for people. So there was a recent study just a few years ago, and they had a cross-section of 1,080 people drinking dairy milk versus non-dairy milk who had histamine issues. There's a 92% reduction in symptoms for the group that didn't do the dairy, and they didn't take antihistamines or do anything. In fact, they didn't have to. One of the things that I like, a lot of times when people are done working with me nutritionally, most of them are not taking any kind of allergy meds anymore, and I kind of like that. From a spectrum of like the things that aren't good for you to take, allergy meds are not really that big of a deal in my opinion as far as an antihistamine, but how nice not to have to take something, or maybe they just take it as needed, or some people are just taking it seasonally. Here's the other thing about antihistamine, Zyrtec and that one in particular, but there's first generation, second generation, and third generation antihistamines. So first generation antihistamines are like Benadryl. Those are the ones that make you sleepy. And so people take that to sleep or whatever. So those are the strongest, and those are the best from an antihistamine property, but you don't want to take them during the day because they'll make you tired. Zyrtec is kind of number 2. Claritin is in that second generation too. The problem with antihistamines is they block the histamine, but they don't really long-term fix anything, so then you have to take it every day. They're not doing anything as far as changing your gut microbiome or helping you digest those histamine foods. So that's why sometimes I say, look, if you need to feel better initially, try an antihistamine, and if you feel better, then maybe that's what it is. But then I say pull that, do a whole histamine diet, try maybe D-hist and the DAO, and maybe then that's what you need. Whenever possible, we want to just try to teach our body how to work better, get to the root cause and work through that, as opposed to just blocking it. So it's like the same idea as like antihistamines, antidepressants, kind of all of that stuff. We're blocking that as opposed to dealing with the root cause. Not that there's not a time and place for some of that stuff, but okay, questions?
What do you do about a small child that has these allergies? I mean, I'm talking infant.
Yeah.
Still on like formula and stuff.
Yeah, so at the clinic, at the doctor's office, I work with kids with constipation and allergy issues a lot, like with food. And so, I mean, a baby, I don't know if I want to give advice on a baby, but like 2 and up, I mean, was just working with a mom the other day. She has 6 kids at home, and she had one that like was feeling sick from some of the food. So we were going through all this foods, and I was trying to make it simple for her because I thought, oh God, she got 6 kids at home. She got to cook breakfast, lunch, and dinner for all these kids. She has homeschool, and so I would pull some of the foods I'm talking about. Honestly, like kids, you're not really losing anything dietarily if you're pulling high histamine foods, especially for a month. But there's so many other foods that are left that, I mean, if you are getting fresh proteins and fruits and vegetables and back to potatoes, whatever, that's really all they need. Kids don't need dairy, you can pull that. So, and I would look at, I don't know what formula, they're on, but like looking at what's in the formula.
I know when my daughter was a baby too, she threw up a lot.
Yeah.
And they had suggested she go on goat's milk.
Yes. Yeah, that's an option. Talk to your doctor about it, but I had that same experience with my son when I was nursing. At 9 months, he didn't want to anymore, and I don't think I was producing enough, and he'd be like, I don't want this. So we just switched him to formula, and I didn't know what to choose, and he got really sick. We were in the ER multiple times because there's dairy in the formula. And he was like, oh, it's horrible to look at. I think I deleted all the pictures. They don't want to look at him anymore. But he was like head to toe eczema, basically.
Yeah, my son was
Bleeding,
too.
head to toe.
It would be instant. He would turn like
Yep.
bright red,
Yep.
and then they would all fill in.
And he gets so sick. And he was crabby all the time, and that was why.
And even the ones that say milk free, they would have that casein,
Mm-hmm.
one called casein protein in there.
And casein protein is one of the number ones that people have issues with. So remember, I hear this often too.
In goat milk, right? Too?
Yes, but less of it, and it's A2 dairy, so it's usually much easier process. So yeah, some people do sheep's or goat milk, and you can get a powder where you mix it too, where it's literally just that powder. So yeah, that's like probably one of the best options than like the processed formulas, I think. My son was having a reaction to they had egg whites in the formula and soy in there too. So here I am giving my, 14-month-old like soy protein. I don't really want to do that either. But again, this is many years ago. I didn't know. And I just needed him to eat something because I couldn't like do it myself. So we learned that. But it was funny then after like 18 months or closer to the age of 2, he like all of a sudden got like 80% better. It's because he wasn't drinking the formula. Like I was just... And then I wasn't giving him milk at that point either, but I was just giving him whatever, the rest of our food, and he was fine, Who knew?
Is the soy bad if it's non-GMO?
From a fermentation perspective, fermented soy can be irritating. It depends on what you're talking about. Are you talking about histamine?
Yeah. Like with the baby allergies.
Oh, baby? Yeah, I don't like soy for babies as much. No. I would do like a goat or a sheep.
Messing with your hormones.
You're just messing with hormones from an early age. Yeah. And I always think back of that and I'm like, ugh. I gave my like 2-year-old boy like soy from it, and it was brief because he got so sick, so we had to pull him off. But I'm like, ugh. But what do you do? What do you do?
Yeah.
It's really sad that what they have available for formula.
There's nothing good. I'm so glad I don't have a baby right now because I don't know what I would do if I couldn't breastfeed. There's a long list. It's like, it looks like you're looking at like the back of a Gatorade container or granola or something, and I don't know what any of that stuff is, chemical. And it's all, even if they'll be like, oh, it's high protein, but it's like manufactured in a lab, and it's like, so yeah, I'd rather, some people have had good luck getting raw milk as an option too, like for babies. Then you have to watch like the pasteurization like issues and stuff with babies. Like that's not something I probably would mess around with either, So yeah, goat milk is like, yeah, that sometimes can be a good option. And I would ask a doctor and see.
My daughter is 47 years old,
Yeah.
but I couldn't find goat's milk.
Mhm.
So it didn't happen, but I wonder if it would have helped,
Yeah. So yeah, those are good options too. Yeah.
LMT water.
It's LMNT. It's an electrolyte packet. I wish I had one with me.
It is, is
Where do
it
you-
like
where
the
do you get that?
letters?
Yes, it's LMNT. It's called like Element. But Velocity in town here, the bike store, downtown on the east side has it.
Okay.
Amazon has it too.
Okay. So
Or
it's
directly-
something you add to water. as
Yeah,
opposed to-
or on the LMNT website. Have you had it before?
No, does it raise
You
your
should
blood
do it.
sugar?
No, raise your blood pressure.
Okay.
But I'm going to turn this off here.